With a cold, moist hand he tore at the clasp on the collar of his cloak, and it fell to the sand. It's sultry today, there's a storm somewhere, Kaifa responded, not taking his eyes off the procurator's reddened face, and foreseeing all the torments that still lay ahead, he thought. Oh, what a terrible month of Nisan we're having this year. No, said Pilate, it's not because of the sultriness, I feel cramped with you here, Kaifa. And, narrowing his eyes, Pilate smiled and added, watch out for yourself, high priest. The high priest's dark eyes glinted, and with his face, no less artfully than the procurator had done earlier, he expressed amazement. What do I hear, procurator? Kaifa replied proudly and calmly. You threaten me after you yourself have confirmed the sentence passed? Can that be? We are accustomed to the Roman procurator choosing his words before he says something. What if we should be overheard, hegemon? Pilate looked at the high priest with dead eyes and, baring his teeth, produced a smile. What's your trouble, high priest? Who can hear us where we are now? Do you think I'm like that young vagrant holy fool who is to be executed today? Am I a boy, Kaifa? I know what I say and where I say it. There is a cordon around the garden, a cordon around the palace, so that a mouse couldn't get through any crack. Not only a mouse, but even that one, what's his name from the town of Kirioth, couldn't get through. Incidentally, high priest, do you know him? Yes, if that one got in here, he'd feel bitterly sorry for himself, in this you will, of course, believe me? Know, then, that from now on, high priest, you will have no peace. Neither you nor your people, and Pilate pointed far off to the right, where the temple blazed on high. It is I who tell you so, Pontius Pilate, equestrian of the golden spear. I know, I know. The black-bearded Kaifa fearlessly replied, and his eyes flashed. He raised his arm to heaven and went on, the Jewish people know that you hate them with a cruel hatred, and will cause them much suffering, but you will not destroy them utterly. God will protect them. He will hear us, the Almighty Caesar will hear, he will protect us from Pilate the destroyer. Oh, no! Pilate exclaimed, and he felt lighter and lighter with every word. There was no more need to pretend, no more need to choose his words. You have complained about me too much to Caesar, and now my hour has come, Kaifa. Now the message will fly from me, and not to the governor in Antioch, and not to Rome, but directly to Capre, to the emperor himself, the message of how you and your Shalem are sheltering known criminals from death. And then it will not be water from Solomon's pool that I give your Shalem to drink, as I wanted to do for your own good. No, not water. Remember how on account of you I had to remove the shields with the emperor's insignia from the walls, had to transfer troops, had, as you see, to come in person to look into what goes on with you here. Remember my words, it is not just one cohort that you will see here in your Shalem, high priest, no. The whole Fulminata legion will come under the city walls, the Arabian cavalry will arrive, and then you will hear bitter weeping and wailing. You will remember Bar Rabban then, whom you saved, and you will regret having sent to his death a philosopher with his peaceful preaching. The high priest's face became covered with blotches, his eyes burned. Like the procurator, he smiled, baring his teeth, and replied, "Do you yourself believe what you are saying now, procurator?" "No, you do not. It is not peace, that the seducer of the people of your Shalem brought us, and you, equestrian, understand that perfectly well." You wanted to release him so that he could disturb the people, outrage the faith, and bring the people under Roman swords. But I, the high priest of the Jews, as long as I live, will not allow the faith to be outraged and will protect the people. Do you hear, Pilate? And Caiaphas raised his arm menacingly. Listen, procurator. Caiaphas fell silent, and the procurator again heard a noise as if of the sea, rolling up to the very walls of the garden of Herod the Great. The noise rose from below to the feet and into the face of the procurator. And behind his back, there, beyond the wings of the palace, came alarming trumpet calls, the heavy crunch of hundreds of feet, the clanking of iron. The procurator understood that the Roman infantry was already setting out, on his orders, speeding to the parade of death so terrible for rebels and robbers. Do you hear, procurator? The high priest repeated quietly. Are you going to tell me that all this, here the high priest raised both arms and the dark hood fell from his head, has been caused by the wretched robber Bar Rabban? The procurator wiped his wet, cold forehead with the back of his hand, looked at the ground, then, squinting at the sky, saw that the red-hot ball was almost over his head and that Kaifa's shadow had shrunk to nothing by the lion's tail, and said quietly and indifferently, "It's nearly noon. We got carried away by our conversation, and yet we must proceed." Having apologized in refined terms before the high priest, he invited him to sit down on a bench in the shade of a magnolia and wait until he summoned the other persons needed for the last brief conference and gave one more instruction connected with the execution. Kaifa bowed politely, placing his hand on his heart, and stayed in the garden while Pilate returned to the balcony. There he told the secretary, who had been waiting for him, to invite to the garden the legate of the legion and the tribune of the cohort, as well as the 2 members of the Sanhedrin and the head of the temple guard, who had been awaiting his summons on the lower garden terrace, in a round gazebo with a fountain. To this Pilate added that he himself would come out to the garden at once, and withdrew into the palace. While the secretary was gathering the conference, the procurator met, in a room shielded from the sun by dark curtains, with a certain man, whose face was half covered by a hood, though he could not have been bothered by the sun's rays in this room. The meeting was a very short one. The procurator quietly spoke a few words to the man, after which he withdrew and Pilate walked out through the colonnade to the garden. There, in the presence of all those he had desired to see, the procurator solemnly and dryly stated that he confirmed the death sentence on Yeshua ha-Nosri, and officially inquired of the members of the Sanhedrin as to whom among the criminals they would like to grant life. Having received the reply that it was Bar Rabban, the procurator said, "Very well," and told the secretary to put it into the record at once, clutched in his hand the clasp that the secretary had picked up from the sand, and said solemnly, "It is time." Here all those present started down the wide marble stairway between walls of roses that exuded a stupefying aroma, descending lower and lower towards the palace wall, to the gates opening onto the big, smoothly paved square, at the end of which could be seen the columns and statues of the Yerushalayim Stadium. As soon as the group entered the square from the garden and mounted the spacious stone platform that dominated the square, Pilate, looking around through narrowed eyelids, assessed the situation.